There you go. Building value. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Good to have everybody here for our fiscal year 2027 operating budget workshop. Appreciate all the work that the city staff and the city management team have put into this presentation. Great to see some of our city department heads and city employees here and some community partners and candidates here as well for your interest and for your participation and in the collective desire to have Hollywood be as strong and robust as we all want it to be and we all work for it to be. So with that, I'm referring now everyone to the city manager and staff for the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Commissioners, and staff. We are very pleased to be here at this operating budget workshop with you. I think it is safe to say that one of the most important things you do as a commission each year is approve a budget, and it's also one of the most important things we do as an administration is to bring you our budget proposals and to keep you abreast of the city's fiscal condition. It's a responsibility, the fiscal stewardship of the city, that we take very seriously. And of course, last week there was some, disconcerting news that we all have to be really mindful of as we head into the next budget season as to the impact of property tax reform and what that means as we, work through our budget. And we want to, be prepared and continue to be really responsible stewards of the tax dollars. It does mean that, and you'll see in this budget and in the numbers or in this discussion today, the value of new construction in our community and how it does benefit us as a community overall, and certainly is an important tactic as we look to continuing to ensure the city's financial future. With that, I am going to turn it over to our Deputy City Manager, Adam Reichbach, and to the budget team. They have done a tremendous amount of work with our department and office directors, and we really appreciate all of their efforts.
Well, good afternoon. Adam Reichbach, Deputy City Manager. Today does mark a great opportunity for us to continue to do our budget development process. It's a very critical step, the budget workshop, and today's focus is going to be on the operating budget. We do plan to have a capital workshop, a separate capital workshop, I believe on August 26th, I believe it has been set for. And so with that, I'm going to ask for the presentation. All right. Okay. There we go. All right, so today's agenda does include a briefing on the June taxable value report, and we'll get into that in a few slides. And then, of course, we will take some time to go through some of the budget proposals and what we've included this year as part of the budget development process for fiscal year 2027. And then, of course, we'll have some time for a discussion as well. So in terms of our budget development process, as you know, our budget development process is really a year-long process. It really does rev into high gear come January with the kickoff of our fiscal strategy kickoff event. And so we usually take that, or we do take that event to take the priorities that are set forth by the commission. Our departments and our office directors are included as part of that process so that they can go ahead and then take what they're hearing from you as priorities and then formulate that as part of their budget proposals. And those budget proposals were due to the budget office and then, of course, the city manager's office look at those budget proposals in the February, March, April timeline. And then, of course, we all wait on bated breath for the June taxable value report, which is really our first take as to what our taxable value is going to be for the following fiscal year. And then, of course, that gets further refined in July as part of the July taxable value, which is known as the final taxable value report. So after today's workshop, we will be setting our maximum millage at our July 8th City Commission meeting. Again, our capital workshop has been set for August 26th, and then we will have our two public hearings in September, first one being September 14th, and the second one being September 23rd this year. So, taxable value information. So this year, the city's taxable value growth is 5.71%. Again, this is as of the June 1st taxable value report numbers. As you can see from the chart on the screen, unfortunately, this is a decrease from last year's 7.86% value growth, and that decreasing trend over the last 5 years does unfortunately continue into fiscal year 2027. It is worth noting, though, that our taxable value growth was significantly bolstered this year by new construction, which we will touch on in a few slides. But without that new construction, as you can see from that third bullet, our taxable value growth would have been under 3% this year. So as you can see, the total taxable value for the city is now a little over, or projected to be a little over $28.6 billion, and this is an increase of approximately $1.5 billion from last year. Again, about a quarter of that is attributable to new construction that was added to the tax roll in fiscal year 2027 or tax year 2026. As you can see from the chart on the left, most sectors, those values have gone up from last year to this year, with the exception of commercial, which did decrease by just about 1.7%. And then with the chart on the right, just an important note, especially as part of the property tax reform conversations, just to really understand what our residential makeup is, single family, of course, being the largest share of taxable value here in the city. With new construction, as I mentioned, one trend that continues to be favorable, at least at this current juncture, is the value of taxable value growth that was added through new construction. This year, our new construction growth number was approximately $403 million. From a dollar value standpoint, we are ranked second in the county in terms of taxable value growth that was added from new construction. Just for comparative purposes, Fort Lauderdale added $1.73 billion to their tax base through new construction. And then after us in ranking would be Pompano Beach at $381 million. And just to put this into perspective for the actual what this means to the city of Hollywood, the $403 million in added taxable value through new construction will yield approximately $3 million in additional tax revenue for the city. So in terms of millage, the proposal at this point is to maintain a flat operating millage of 7.4293. With the growth in taxable value, we were able to reduce our debt service millage by 0.022 mils. Again, this number will likely change as part of the July taxable value report as we'll get our new numbers. Then, of course, we're able to reduce our debt service. And just for public consumption purposes, think of the debt service as a mortgage payment. As long as we make our mortgage payments, we then are able to, with taxable value growth, we're able to assess a lower millage in order to collect the same amount of money that's due as part of our debt service payments. And that's what explains the 0.022 mil reduction. Just to put that in perspective in terms of a dollar amount, if all things were the same, based on an average single-family home with an assessed value of $391,000, that would be approximately $8 savings at the 0.022 mils reduction. Okay, so now for the elephant in the room, property tax reform. So just to go through a little bit, and again, just for full disclosure, property tax reform will be on the ballot come November 3rd of 2026. With that being said, if it is approved by 60% of the voters, the impact to municipalities and counties will take place in fiscal year 2028. So although this is for the fiscal year 2027 budget, we certainly need to be cognizant of this because we will not know the impact of property tax reform until after we approve the fiscal year 2027 budget, and of course, while we're already about a month into the fiscal year 2027 budget being in place. So just to put things into perspective, again, just for informational purposes only, property taxes do represent about 47% of our general fund budget, so about half of our budget comes from property taxes. And so that's why property tax reform is so critical and so concerning to a lot of municipalities and counties. Public safety represents about 2/3 of our general fund budget. And so again, just putting that into perspective with the dollars and where everyone's property tax dollars go, a very large chunk of that goes to providing public safety. So again, the November 2026 ballot question does propose a couple of changes. Number one, it would propose an increase to the homestead exemption for fiscal year 2028 of additional $100,000, so roughly $150,000 would be the homestead exemption. Just to put that into perspective, the loss in taxable value would just be over $2 billion, and that would be represent about a $15 million loss in property tax revenue here to the city. When, as part of this bill, the increase to the homestead exemption would be $250,000 come fiscal year 2029. That would be a loss in taxable value of about $3.8 billion, and the loss in revenue would be just over $28 million. Additionally, just worth mentioning as well, what the bill also does, it actually defines core services, and with that being said, it defines what property tax revenue can be used for. On the screen here, you'll see a list of what the state provides as allowable uses of ad valorem revenue. Certainly public safety being the number one on the list. Education, although I think it's important to point out that schools would be exempt from this property tax reform. They would be the only taxing district in the state. Schools generally, all 67 school districts would be exempt from any property tax reform. It would just be applied to special districts, counties, and of course municipalities. Then also infrastructure, natural resource projects, debt obligations, employee retirement obligations, as well as other government operations, which really are for the funding, the administration, and the operations of municipalities and county officers and commissions. I think this was really intended, this was a last-minute add as part of the deliberations last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago now. And so this was really a value add for the constitutional officers to be included as part of this conversation. But as we mentioned earlier, this is the fiscal year 2027 budget. We just want to make you cognizant of those things as they potentially come down the pike. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Budget Director, Duncan Brown, who will take you through the remainder of the presentation.
Good to see you also, sir. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commission. My name is Duncan Brown. I'm representing the Office of Budget and Strategy. For this portion of the presentation, we'll be talking about the strategic priorities and initiatives that city administration use to guide their decision-making and prioritization of the requests that we received from all the city departments for funding for the initiatives and services that they felt would enhance their department's service delivery. So before in the budget we go and add new things and increase service, we have to also fund our existing obligations. So an existing obligation is a legally binding commitment or a liability that requires funding or a payment in the near future. These obligations represent funding that has been contractually dedicated for a specific purpose, such as vendor contracts, collective bargaining agreements, pension liability, wages, and benefits. So in this chart, we have some examples of the existing obligations that the City of Hollywood had to fund before we increased our services. So the first will be annual required contribution for our pension. The city also increased the amount of retirement plans that they offer to city employees for their retirement after they terminate work at the city. And then also we assumed an increase for our health insurance. We had some collective bargaining agreements. So those include COLAs for our different members of our city staff. So we have police and fire COLA at 4%. We have general and non-rep employee COLAs at 2%. And then we also have longevity changes that are effective for FY 2026 that came out through those collective bargaining negotiations. And then lastly, we'll have contractual increases. These are increases to maintain current service levels. So landscaping for our Parks and Rec Department and also Public Works. We have PC leases for our computer replacement program with IT, also software license increases. We have increases for our fire operations, for firehouse, medical equipment, and maintenance. We had an increase for our building maintenance with the addition of the police headquarters, also increased funding for contractual services and cleaning our facilities and making sure our equipment is up to par. And also the city leases all of its vehicles, so we had to increase funding for our enterprise leases. And then lastly, we had other inflationary costs such as CPIs and contract escalations. Another existing service that we wanted to maintain would be our special events. So the City of Hollywood has special events managed and hosted by Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Affairs. So the City of Hollywood enhanced its special events funding in FY 2026. It was an increase in funding of about $400,000. And so for FY 2027, the city is proposing to maintain its current service level of special events for the community. And so we're estimating a cost of nearly $2 million. These costs are broken out in the following categories. We have city events, sponsorships, event security services, fire and police costs, and also advertising costs. I'd like to note that the fire and police costs do not include the cost for staff time. And in the following slides, we will have a list of the special events that the city offers. You'll have the event name, you'll have the city cost, you'll have the cost of the sponsorship, and then you'll have the advertising cost to promote these events. And so this will be the first group of events, and then next we'll have the city's PAYGO plan. The city's PAYGO plan mainly represents recurring funding that is expected to be built into the budget over the next 5 years. So the strategy of a PAYGO plan allows the city to prioritize its ongoing upkeep of city facilities and equipment to extend asset lifespans, minimizes lifecycle costs, and prevents expensive replacements. The PAYGO plan allows departments to focus on maintenance and replacement of the city's extensive investments made over the last several years. The Budget Office will continue to fund one-time projects and additional funding and add additional funding to CIP as needed using surplus fund balance and when additional funding becomes available. And as previously mentioned, we will discuss the city's capital improvement plan at the capital workshop in August. And then here's a list of the items on the city's PAYGO plan currently. Okay, so after we consider everything that we have to fund to maintain current service levels, in February, city administration had the fiscal strategy kickoff with the city commission to get your feedback on these two questions that we asked to help us with our goals and priorities in determining what we would like to fund in the budget. So the first question we asked, what two concerns or needs do you hear most from residents? The next question we asked was, what two programs or services do you believe the city needs to fund or increase funding for in FY 2027? And so we use these priorities in driving our decision-making and prioritizing our requests from departments that were submitted to the Budget Office. And some examples of things that were mentioned would be litter and illegal dumping, parking citation issues, compliance, code compliance issues, traffic and speed mitigation issues, and also availability of parking at parks for families and residents. And then for the second question, some of the responses were community development efforts, alternative transportation options, employee development and retention, and also the addition of AI cameras on city vehicles too.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same. If you could repeat the concerns you hear most from residents again.
Number one would be litter and illegal dumping, parking citation issues, code compliance issues, traffic and speed mitigation, and then availability of parking for parks. And then the second question, the feedback was community development efforts such as rental assistance, first-time home buyers, alternative transportation options, employee development, AI cameras on city vehicles to identify potholes and code violations, and then also investment in planning, zoning, and urban design. And so based on those responses, we focused on these community priorities. So these priorities are some of the priorities that are provided in the strategic plan. So the city's mission is to provide a resilient and sustainable city that nurtures quality living and fosters a healthy environment where everyone can prosper. To accomplish this mission, the city focuses on its 7 strategic areas: communications and civic engagement, employee development and empowerment, financial management and administration, economic vitality, infrastructure and facilities, quality of life and strong neighborhoods, and also public safety. After our discussions at the fiscal strategy kickoff, the initiatives identified for the FY 2027 operating budget seek to enhance our impact on the following priorities. And these are the priorities that and so we talked about having an impact on the following priorities. So we want to talk about, why impact? Why is impact important? So we are focusing on impact because impact is a noticeable and ideally measurable effect or influence by city employees on how we provide our services to residents and businesses, promoting accountability that will lead us to more efficient and effective methods of service delivery. By focusing on our impact, we are better equipped to address commission priorities. And so as an administrative priority, impact is a value system that will guide behavior, decision-making, and priority setting for improving the communities, neighborhoods within the city of Hollywood. This is what impact means to us. So impact is innovation, it's momentum, it's process improvement, it's accountability, it's customer satisfaction, and technology. So these are the priorities that, as a city, that we would like to focus on in the upcoming operating budget. And so for innovation, some of the things that we like to, enhance the service delivery on in terms of innovation would be Civic Plus expansion. Civic Plus expansion is a tool to help us become ADA compliant with our documents, PDF, so that we can have compliance with ADA requirements with all of our documents, not just on the city website, but also with our PDF. You can't hear me? For people who can't hear, that have disabilities, things of that nature, yes, sir. We also propose funding for the license plate readers. So we do have license plate readers at some of our parking garages, but this would give us license plate readers at the parking garages that currently do not have license plate readers. And then also we have an increased funding for our real-time intelligence center. So this would be 1 police sergeant, 4 civilian staff to help monitor the facility, and then also FUSIS, which is an operating program for the Real-Time Intelligence Center. Next, for momentum. So for momentum, we added enhanced service for retail recruitment tool. So this will assist us with the vacancy rate in our downtown businesses in the city of Hollywood. We also increased funding for facility maintenance, so adding additional dollars to maintain our buildings and also a position to help with the supervision of those responsibilities. We're also working on a plan for the sunset of our CRA, and then also the addition of 6 firefighters for the fire department. For process improvements, we're adding a clerk's minute subscription. There's a new requirement for how long it takes us to put our minutes out, so this will help us with the process in terms of typing up those minutes, getting those ready for publishment. We have phase 3 of our SELA with development services and building. It's about 1.7. This is 1.7 is total general fund and the building fund. And then we also are seeking an asset management system. It's my understanding that CityWorks is sunsetting, and so we can either transition to Trimble or we can acquire another asset management system. Next, we have an accountability. So as part of the property tax reform bill, we are required to provide transparency to residents on our website in terms of searchable data, so they can go in and mine the data and see how the city is managing its finances. So this is a portal through OpenGov that the city is currently working on so that we can enhance our financial transparency with the public. We're also planning funding to make an update to our strategic plan. We do have some new commissioners coming on the board, so we would like to have funding in case we want to update our strategic plan. And then we have funding for cybersecurity, so make sure that our information and technology systems are safe and that we're not putting ourselves at any risk with hackers and things of that nature. And then here we have customer satisfaction. So for customer satisfaction, some initiatives that we are adding to the budget would be the citywide call center. This is a current initiative being taken on by CMed and IT to acquire a new call center for the city. The community shuttle coordination with our engineering and mobility transportation department, and also continue the investment in our employees through employee development and training and retention. And then here for technology, we have a drone first responder program. So this will be for the police officers to have the ability to use drones in helping with their surveillance of the community. We also have AI training and implementation through the IT department. As we all know that AI is becoming more integrated in our workplace. So this will help us with training our staff to be able to use the AI and also help us govern the AI and kind of protect the city from any of those risks. And then we also have the city detect service. So this will be AI equipment on vehicles within our code department to allow us to identify code violations, maintain physical property within the city as our employees drive around. Next, we have our downtown CRA commitments. So these commitments, we receive $3 million. And so this is how we plan to spend the incentives that we receive. So we'll have TIF incentives for Block 58, Bread Building, and the Tropic. We'll have the block by block contract. And then we'll also have economic development incentives, the Sun Shuttle and Circuit. So that was regarding our downtown CRA. For our BCRA, the BCRA does sunset on June 25th, 2027. So currently, city staff and administration, we are working on developing a mechanism so that we can transition any pending projects from the CRA to the city for completion. And then also, once that's completed, we will do our best to maintain those investments made in the CRA district. And so today we are going over the operating workshop. And so after the operating workshop, our next steps will be the maximum millage. Setting that, we'll have a capital workshop in August. We'll also have our first public hearing on September 14th. And then we'll have our last public hearing on September 3rd. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you. City Manager?
So, Commissioner, you were able to get an understanding of some of the things that have shaken out as we have looked at the multitude of budget requests from the offices and departments of the city, and the focus on innovation, momentum, process improvement, accountability, customer satisfaction, and technology. We do believe that these areas are important for us to move ahead as an organization in terms of how we handle our customers, our public, as well as the efficiencies that we need to establish in order to make the most of all of the resources that we have. With that, if you have any questions or comments on specific items, we certainly would like to hear those and understand what those might be.
So I'm going to, Vice Mayor Calerio will ask questions or provide comments first. But I would like Adam or City Manager to address, you called it the elephant in the room. So if property tax reform is approved by voters, Adam, Ray Lynn, and company, and I'm sure you've given thought to how you would approach a reduction in the tax base of the city. We're potentially a $3.8 billion reduction in fiscal year 29. I know that's a couple years out, but how has that impacted or is impacting your deployment, setting aside reserves, whatnot, in fiscal year 27, if at all, in preparation? Just what is your approach and thinking? I'd like to know.
Well, from a standpoint of what we're doing to prepare for this, I think certainly as we approach, let me first say this. First and foremost, as we approach the fiscal year 2027 budget.
Record year.
Yes, is that we are cognizant of that when we add things or add service delivery to the budget for fiscal year 2027, those will in all likelihood, when they're not one-time expenses, those expenses will continue on in subsequent fiscal years. So anything that we do to further put strain on the budget, when you see at first the 15 million, but then a second year a 28 million, and then one thing that's worth mentioning as well is that starting in fiscal year fiscal year 30, you will also see that the homestead exemption then go up every year by CPI. So as you know, this year was the first year, if all things are the same, that the $50,000 homestead exemption, actually fiscal year 2026 was the first year that the homestead exemption increased by CPI. Obviously, this is now year 2 going into fiscal year 27. With property tax reform starting in fiscal year 28, homestead exemptions will all be at a flat $150,000, and then in fiscal year 29, $250,000, and then the subsequent fiscal years thereafter, they would go up. The $250,000 would be increased thereafter by CPI. So again, when we add things to the budget in fiscal year 27, I think what we all need to be mindful of is that they will put a further strain on our ability to provide those services as we continue on. So in terms of what we are doing, we took a very, and from a staff standpoint, took a very, very hard look at every single budget request that came this year. It also is worth mentioning that a 5.71% increase in taxable value does not yield that much additional revenue. We're talking, I think, roughly about $7 million in addition, $9 million in additional revenue overall. But of course, when you take into account as Duncan mentioned, all of the contractually obligated services, it doesn't really yield an additional large amount of dollars for us to have added services to our budget for this year. With that being said, as we go into fiscal year 2028, again, we're jumping ahead a little bit of what happens in November, but I think it's also worth mentioning that we will have to if this does get approved by 60% of the voters, the city will have to take a very hard look at our services and the services that we currently provide, and we may have to make some reductions or some changes in the level of services that we offer our residents, as well as potentially looking at some additional fee increases to account for that lost revenue. So again, all things are on the table at the end of the day with regards to what we do to address it come fiscal year 2028. Thankfully, I guess if there's any good thing that comes out of this, it does allow us to really take an introspective look at our budget as we go into fiscal year 2027, but also it gives us a little bit of time to plan that out so we know exactly what, and of course having conversations with the City Commission about what we plan to do at that point with regards to property tax reform.
Thank you, Adam. Vice Mayor Coleri.
Thank you, Mayor.
Should be.
Thank you, Mayor. So if we could just go to page 16. I want to go back to the question that was asked just for the future, for our next meeting, so we have a little bit more breakdown. If we could have the list of concerns that were posed so we could, I guess, maybe hone in a little bit more, because that's a little surprise to me.
Well, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just so you know, what this came from was actually from the fiscal kickoff. So this is what we heard from you all as what you're hearing from members of the residents, or members of the community. But again, we will provide you that list again, so you have that information at your disposal.
Okay, great. And then I think, in addition to that, if we could address some of them that are there. For example, first-time homebuyers. We just met with Ryan Coote, most of us, I'm sure, and there's such a positiveness that's moving forward with that. So I think that with those questions, then there should be some type of resolution or plan of execution to nip them in the butt.
So if I could, on this first-time homebuyer and all of our community development programs, of course, that's not included as part of the general fund budget. Those are included as part of obviously our CDBG, our SHIP, our home funds, as well as through the ILA as well. So all of those are accounted for outside of property taxes and, for that matter, the general fund, and they are housed in the special fund for that. But
so then maybe we need to just kind of be a little bit more cognizant of deciphering it, since we're just talking about this today. Why
Sure.
do we add that in? Because it creates muddying of waters.
Sure.
Just FYI.
Yep.
On page, I'm sorry to go back, on page 13, can you please clarify the statement that was made about fire and police costs?
Yes. So police and sorry, if I could, Duncan. So police and fire costs includes personnel. It does not include parks personnel. So any costs associated with our park staff are not accounted for on this, but obviously when you see the $375,000 for police and fire, that does include the costs associated with providing those services to these events.
So for our next meeting, if we could just have a cost in addition to it to show, or is that what you're saying, the 375? So remove police and fire and just play with the absence of Parks and Recs?
Correct. So that it does not include the parks. That does not include our park staff, but it does include that 375 represents the police and fire costs for sponsored events, if I'm correct, right? Okay.
So what's missing then? Parks and Recs costs?
Parks and Rec costs, but we don't.
Include that is what I'm asking.
Sure,
So
we can.
That's it, just make sure.
Okay,
it's
we
included.
can work on
This is
providing
just food for thought for
Yep.
the next presentation, so we are completely transparent. That's all.
Okay.
Page 21, I think it is, 21. When you say, so just food for thought additional, so momentum, beach CRA sunset transition, there's not a cost affiliation with that, I'm assuming. It's just that we're still continuing the process, but there has to be some type of cost that is applied to that, correct? Or am I?
Well, remember, we will be able to, as a city now, be able to enjoy the revenue that we now has been going to the beach CRA, now come back into the general fund. But with that being said, I think there's been some discussion in the past about potentially a windfall of dollars. That's not accurate. Of course, there will be additional dollars that come into the general fund because they will not be going to the CRA funds. However, as Duncan mentioned, we'd have to maintain the service levels that we've provided to specifically the beach CRA, as well as the infrastructure that's been put into place. So all of that needs to be accounted for with the additional revenue that the city is collecting. Now those dollars will be going to ensuring that those infrastructure improvements and those services are maintained.
So with that, if we could also have a breakdown of what those services include, that way it's a better understanding as well.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last one on that page, since we have two prices and we don't have it for the other, this is still page 21, certified firefighters. Is there a cost associated with that? And if so, we need to include that in the next presentation. You don't have to give it to me now, just food for thought as we move forward.
It's about $1 million.
So that needs just to be
Sure.
transparency, right? I think it's a great job, by the way. I'm not trying to nitpick, but I'm just preparing myself for the questions that will come through.
Absolutely.
Page 24. The same with that, a citywide call center, what's the cost going to be? Just a breakdown so that we better understand it. And I
So-
would like to see the community shuttle coordination. If there's some way we can kind of tighten our belts and really provide community shuttle in addition to TOPS and further expand that, I think it would be great, and what that cost would look like.
Right. So for the citywide call center, we are currently, the city commission approved a couple of meetings ago, the ability for us to negotiate with the top-ranked firm. We are doing that, so that negotiations are ongoing. So we do not have what the final cost will be for that. That's why you don't see a dollar amount associated with that. On the community shuttle coordination, of course, that's working with Broward County as part of the surtax dollars.
Well, that in itself is an issue. Okay, and then the last page, 25. As far as the drone first responder cost, they mentioned that it was with PD, but don't we, I know we have a presentation, or we had a presentation here regarding the drone safety from the fire department. Is that included in that cost, or is that an additional cost for that service?
I certainly will defer to the chiefs on this, but my understanding is that this is really for us to operate drones to be the first line of defense when it comes to
First line of
accidents.
response. Yeah.
Yes.
So if we could include the safety drone that was presented to us by the fire department as well, because it is considered technology. It's really not PD. I have no problem with that. Actually give them as much resources as needed, but I also feel the same for fire, that they need to have that ability to be able to save, that they showed us, to send the life preserver. I don't know if it's a trial, but let's invest in that for safety.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners. Jeff Devlin, Chief of Police. So the drone first responders is a police-related item, and it'll be stationed at 2 locations in the city, our police headquarters, and a place yet to be determined by us and the company. But it can be utilized by other disciplines in the city. Fire can certainly use it, public works, public utilities, and it is meant to get to a location quicker than an officer, give you firsthand knowledge what's going on by flying over it, and we'll get that into the real-time crime center. So give us real-time information of what's going on.
No, I think it's amazing. But I think maybe my more specific is, maybe you can answer it, Chief. We were demonstrated here at City Hall, the drone that flew and dropped the life preserver. Beach is our #1 tourist draw. And if we could provide that safety measure, I don't know if that falls under your privy or the fire. And if so, let's include that price in here to make sure we have enough available.
So Jeff Levy, Fire Chief, just to clear up we have two different projects. They work simultaneously together, but our drones that we utilize for the fire service and beach safety are in service with all of our vehicles and beach safety to drop the life preservers. So that is a separate program than what the police chief is referring to.
So that's my question. I would like to see that cost on the form as well and make sure that we have enough availability for our protection. That's already existing. No, I think it's not. Is this additional funding?
So this program that's on the screen here, the drone first responder for 300,000, that's the police program that Chief Devlin just referenced. The program at the beach with regards to dropping the life preservers, that's already in place. That's with the fire department. That's not part of this presentation because that's already been a funded initiative.
We don't
as
need to
part
get
of
any
this
more.
year's
Okay.
budget.
That's
Correct.
perfect, then thank you. I think that's all I have. I appreciate all the input. I know this is our first go at it. Just if we could have additional, breakdowns, a little bit more availability to know exactly where things are going, a little clearer outline. I mean, obviously, there's some things that I would say are improprieties to special events that are on the page. We give a little bit more for certain things and not, for example, our veterans picnic. I would say we need to increase those, but that's a personal preference. I don't know how everyone else feels, so we could always nitpick at that. But the best thing is that we're doing the best that we can customer service-wise to help provide these events and special events to involve our community and our residents. So I'm just appreciative for that. I just think maybe we need to fine-tooth it a little bit better.
Okay.
That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get to Commissioner Shuham.
Thank you, Mayor. Adam, just a couple questions. The first is something we talk about every year, and that is the maintenance of capital improvements and other city-owned inventory in any capacity. And I know that we have invested in significant software, but the cost to upload everything into that software, is that covered in this budget?
So actually, that you can see here on the screen, what we're included in this year's budget is an asset management system. That's what Duncan had referenced. I know that CityWorks is being phased out, and we're looking at I think it's Trumbull, as a potential asset management system for the city. And again, that is what we are including in this year's budget at this point.
Sorry. Hold on.
At some point within the next year or so, will the city's assets be uploaded into an asset maintenance program?
Good afternoon, Commissioner. So yeah, that's correct. So staff has been working on this process for the last couple months now prior to the prior city manager. We're near closing. We do have some assets existingly in the system, and we're currently working to upload the rest of it. A lot of departments have already uploaded their spreadsheets. We just have to convert the spreadsheet and upload the spreadsheet into the program in order to get those assets. But it's currently being built as we speak.
Fantastic. I think all of us up here hear from residents, while they're happy to see the city make improvements, they get discouraged when they don't see things properly maintained. So we've been talking about this for a long time, how to get everything in an automatic maintenance routine. So I'm very hopeful that this will actually happen. So thank you for that. The other point that you made, and we articulate this whenever we talk about the phasing out of the CRAs, is the commitment of the city to maintain the level of service, and even someday hopefully to improve upon that level of service within the CRAs. And so one question I've had in the past, and I'll reiterate it, and I would really appreciate seeing it, is how much are we spending on those, not just enhanced services in the beach CRA, but all services, so that there's a benchmark going forward and we can demonstrate that we're living up to that commitment. Is that something that we can get as far as fire, public works, parks, code, all of it, so that when we, in the future, say, yes, the city adhered to the commitment that it made, we'll have that benchmark.
Yes, I believe so. I think it would be also important to point out that, of course, those will go up year over year.
Of
on its own
course,
through
yeah.
CPI as well as additional cost increase.
Okay. And then if you could go back to slide 7, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what this slide is showing us. So is this saying between this year, FY26, and FY27, the value of new construction went up almost $100 million?
So what this is saying is that every year, when it comes to our taxable value report, we get what the amount of new construction that was added into the tax rolls. And so in 2026, we added about a little over $300 million of new taxable value into our tax
And then
rolls.
the projected is for...
And then as of the June report, this year,
Okay.
we're looking at $403 million of projects that are now on our tax rolls. And yes, and this is actual, it's not projected, this is actual as of June. Again, may change a little bit between now and July, but again, $403 million is the added, this is not projected, this is added into our tax rolls starting in tax year 2026, which is fiscal year 2027,
Okay, great.
meaning that they were added prior to January 1 of 2026.
So if you were to look back into FY26, what is the tax revenue that that $308 million generated, roughly, just?
I don't know if we would have that number offhand. but-
Multiply, I'll do a little, hold on.
Yeah, we can probably multiply that against our millage rate.
That's what I'm thinking.
sure.
So 7.5 times 300 million is,
Our assistant budget director.
our crack calculators.
Putting a
out
lot of
there.
pressure on her to do this, but we can certainly get you that number. If not now, we'll get you that number.
About 2.3 million.
Okay, so $300 million of construction generates $3 million.
About
No,
two,
two-
2.5.
2.5, and the $400 million is what will
$3 million.
generate $3 million.
Okay, so
Approximately
roughly $300 million of property improvements.
Well,
It's
I
not
wouldn't
just
say-
that it's new
No,
construction.
this is new construction.
There was nothing in these sites before. There was nothing there. In other words, it wasn't getting zero before.
Well, correct. So this is actually value added to the tax
That's my
roll.
question.
Okay.
So it's not that it was worth zero before and now it's worth 300 million. This is the delta?
This would be the improvements to the properties in added taxable value. Yes, so if a building did not exist there and a building, there obviously if it was privately owned, they were being taxed based on the value of the land. With the 400 million, that includes now a building or a structure that has now been added to that property and has been reassessed, and that's now what the taxable value is for
The
that
delta.
property.
So for example, in District 2, hypothetically, we have lots of areas where 2 or 3 houses were purchased and now a small apartment complex has gone up. When the 2 or 3 houses were there, there was a tax revenue generated. Now that the apartment's there, this graph is showing us the added, or is it showing us what's at that site now?
I believe it would be the improvement, so I think it would be the
Just the
it would be the
delta.
delta, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
I just want that to be
Yes.
verified. Okay, all right, great. And then my last question is, let's see. Well, not my last, my next question. So just so the community, our community understands, 47% of the budget is from property taxes. The remaining 53%, is that primarily from other charges to our residents? For example, tell us what constitutes the other 53%.
That's certainly part of it. We have user fees, we have our fire assessment fee, but we also have our state shared sales tax revenue. We have other franchise fees, utility franchise fees, licenses and permits. So again,
that can go into the general.
That all goes into,
General
yes,
fund.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually, and I think Commissioner Quintana said page 29, so of our existing budget has a breakdown of every single line item of our revenues that go into the general fund. But again, when it comes to property taxes representing such a large percentage, albeit almost half of the general fund budget, when you make adjustments to that, that's where, certainly it does raise some concern for municipalities in the long run.
Of course. But, we have this conversation also every year, but I think in light of what may be coming, it's even more important, and that is trying to look nationwide at other municipalities to see if there is anything creative happening out there to generate revenue aside from property taxes. Because this is, could be an opening salvo from the state. We don't know, right? It could just continue to get worse. The state is clearly forcing cities into a corner. And I just think that it's something, Raylyn, and your team's vision planning, that this is a really important thing. Yes, we have to address areas to work in our current situation, but we really have to be creative and look nationwide and maybe even internationally to say, how are other jurisdictions raising funds? And, I would hope that's happening, but it's even more important now than ever.
And I will say, certainly we are always cognizant and always looking for best practices of how we could raise additional fees without having ideally having a diversified revenue stream is ideal to the sustainability, the financial sustainability of a city. I will say, though, for what it's worth, the state of Florida does preclude us from making some adjustments. I mean, certainly if you look at nationwide or even internationally, Florida does not have a state income tax. Florida, we get a portion of our sales tax revenue, but let's be honest, we all know that Broward County in particular is a donor county, meaning that our dollars are going statewide. That's something that we can't control. We also do not see any tourist development tax dollars. All of that goes, in this case, to Broward County, whereas that may be something that other cities and other parts of the country do get as well. Some cities in other parts of the country are able to raise sales tax. We're not able to do that here. So again, we do look at other creative ways and mechanisms in which we can collect revenue and ensure that the financial sustainability of the city. But again, for what it's worth, a lot of what we're able to do here is very different than, let's say, Georgia or California or Texas in regards to their revenue collection, just because their state constitution provides different abilities than we are able to do here in Florida.
Okay, now this really is last. So much of what's in this budget and has been in budgets in recent years is related to technology to help our staff and city run more efficiently. And those efficiencies are, assuming, somehow being measured. And I think that it's important for you, and this may fall under Steve Stewart, I don't know who, but to be able to demonstrate to not just to the commission, but to the residents that these investments are worthwhile. It's a lot of money. Just looking at this maintenance plan, that cost X, but there should be a way to project it's going to save us 10x because we'll have a better maintenance system. Or drones, the drone system cost a lot of money, but here's where not only will it increase public safety, but it could save HPD and the fire department thing. So I think, how is that happening?
So we do have a very robust performance measurement system now under Steve Stewart in the performance management piece. We're going to be really looking as part of the fiscal year 27 budget to really revamp our performance measures. We have great performance measures, but I think we also there's some room for growth in our performance measurement program. And so to that point, especially in light of potential revenue shortfalls that we have coming down the pike, we're going to be looking for greater and the need for greater process improvement. You're going to see a greater emphasis on our performance measures starting in fiscal year 27 in particular with regards to efficiencies and being able to measure those efficiencies and ensure that we are getting the most bang for our buck, especially when bucks become a little bit tighter for us, potentially become a little tighter for us. We're going to have to look for ways in which we can do things more efficiently through process improvement, or frankly, for what it's worth, as I mentioned earlier with regards to service levels, if certain services may be costing us a significant amount of dollars and they're not being utilized or valued as much in the community, that may be something that we may have to look at reducing as part of any revenue shortfall. So again, especially as we go into this fiscal year, if property tax reform does come to fruition, we are going to take a very hard look at every single service we provide here in the city and ensure that we are being the most efficient possible, number one, but also number two, if there's any efficiencies that we can potentially gain as part of this process, certainly we're going to look to implement them moving forward. I think
So-
for what it's worth, again, at the end of the day, when it comes to property tax reform, I think ultimately this really serves as a wake-up call for local governments to really take a look at their service levels and look for ways that we can provide greater efficiencies. And listen, at the end of the day, we are in the service business, and we want to make sure that we're providing a level of service to our residents and to our businesses and to our visitors, and that's something that's very important to us. And so we are going to make sure that we look at all of those services moving forward.
So thanks, and if anybody can do it, it's Steve Stewart. And, I've seen these performance measurements in the past. I haven't really seen it tied to dollars, so that's going to be something that I look forward to seeing. And I would just say the same comment about searching nationwide for ideas to generate revenue, that same mindset with respect to increasing efficiencies. We've talked up here about using AI more, different things, but just simple things that other cities do that we can learn from and make our own teams more efficient.
Absolutely. That is something that we can certainly look at nationwide, even in Florida, but obviously nationwide or internationally. Those are things that we can certainly implement that hopefully will not be precluded by state statutes.
Thank you so much. Great job.
Thank you. If members of the commission who wanted to speak, if you could re-click because of the way in which my system is operating. Let's go to Commissioner Biederman.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right. When you'll be next.
I had a list of stuff and questions, but I'm going to just catch the tailwind of Commissioner Shuham with the efficiency thing. So up until now, it seems like it's just a performance measure, right? It's a report card. This is how many permits we're doing. This is this and this is that. And it doesn't show us how we can turn that information into cost savings, right? So I think that's important for the future.
And for what it's worth, I will tell you that we don't just do performance measures for the sake of doing performance measures. As part of our budget process, specifically and especially during our budget process, we look at those performance measure matrix in order to ensure that we are potentially allocating additional resources where they need, or potentially if there's areas in which we can be more efficient with our resources, we do that. So the measures have been very useful for us in terms of our budget development process and also guiding the direction of the city overall. But yes, certainly that's something that will be very, very important to us, especially going into this fiscal year.
Right, and then some of the stuff that Commissioner, the Vice Mayor talked about, I just want to touch on real quick under some of my comments. But on page 6, just curiosity and for public information, a lot of my stuff is public information, but we talk about the commercial, and now they're going to drop it to 5% max on commercial property, but we don't have that problem in. Have we ever had a max of the 10%?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because it's looking like 1.7, it's down 1.7
Well,
now.
and that has nothing to do with this has nothing to do with the 5%, right? This is just the fact that when properties were reassessed, and again, through that process, the commercial value has decreased. Now, it's also potentially a function of the fact that other areas have gone up as well. But again, the 1.7% is not.
That's an average. It's not per
Correct.
property.
Yes.
Some properties go down, some go up, and it
Correct.
comes out with that.
Exactly.
Okay. So I
Yes.
get that. I get it. I guess I get that. On page 7, do we have an estimate of, based on knowing what's in the pipeline, do we forecast what's going to be next year and the following year based on when we know they're going to get a TOC, not a TOC, but a CO?
Yeah, so we certainly work with development services as part of this. I mean, as you can see here, we update this list for you every year with a sampling of the development projects. Obviously, the ones that have been completed are officially on the tax roll for 2026. We see the ones that are under construction, and then, of course, the ones that are in permitting. But that is certainly is part of the revenue estimating committee. But that's a conglomeration between finance and budget. We do look at that as part of the budget development process for next year. Obviously, the $403 million number is a real number. That's actually reported on from the property appraiser, so we feel comfortable that is the accurate number, albeit there may be a few dollar change here between now and July. But that is a real number that is added for this year. But as we look into fiscal year 2028, that is something that we do as part of our revenue estimating through that process.
So do we know what under construction's value is going to be when it comes on the tax rolls in 28? Or some of them might be 29, I guess, and then in permitting is going to be 29 or 30?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly we don't have that number offhand, but we can certainly work with development services to provide that information, at least some estimation of that information.
Because we are uncharted territory, kind of, right? And
And I think it's also worth mentioning, just for informational purposes, obviously, that with the Live Local Act, the current iteration of the Live Local Act, it does provide for a 75% reduction in the valuation of those properties as well.
right, which is also concerning. But are any of these Live Local under construction stuff?
No, they are not.
No.
None of them are Live Local, but it is important to note that Village
Jordana
Jordana is an affordable housing. And so those units,
percentage of
those are 100% because they are averaging to 60% of AMI.
So Village Jordana that we gave money to is not paying any taxes
The state and
for 30 years?
at the moment, the tax break is an elongated tax break. So it is, as we invest in affordable housing that is needed in our community, there is the state and, the county have incentivized it with tax breaks.
So it's 100% city, 100% county. Does the hospital district also give 100% and schools also give 100%, or those are different?
There are some reductions in impact fees, but I do believe that there still are property taxes related to schools that are due.
Okay.
I believe so.
Page 14. Just point of note, we did drop the Jazz Festival dollar amount. It wasn't updated last week. And it's not reflecting the possible grant and stuff like that.
Understood. Yes, thank you for catching that. Appreciate that.
I'm happy to hear about the AI cameras on our vehicles that will help to improve our neighborhoods. The firefighters that Vice Mayor was talking about, that's 7 firefighters. Is that because it's SAFER grant?
It's actually 6 firefighters.
6
We
firefighters.
are applying for a SAFER grant, but this is actually 6 firefighters that we are adding to the budget,
So is
or
that-
proposing to add for the budget for fiscal year 27.
Is that part of the CBA, or is that because the fire chief wants to put an extra crew somewhere, or
I
does
believe
it
this is-
cover overtime?
I believe this is-
overtime, so it's a revenue neutral kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this is actually referenced for the peak truck for stations 45, but I'll let Director of Public Safety.
Well, that's
reference.
already in. We already have a peak truck in 45.
For the 24/7 of that peak truck.
That was done last year, I think.
Yeah, excuse me. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, Chris O'Brien. The extra staffing is needed is to reduce overtime. So currently, when the fire department comes in, for the operational folks, they come in at below minimum staffing every day. So what that creates is overtime. There's a total of about 9 or 10 firefighters that need to be added overall to make their minimum staffing numbers work every day, which will include for unexpected emergencies, people calling in sick, vacation time, and things of that nature. There's also another kind of staffing concern we're dealing with to comply with our mutual aid request for ladder trucks that we're dealing with separately. But this request specifically is for the folks to enhance staffing. Rescue 245 operates most of the time with overtime on 12-hour shifts. If overtime's not needed to staff the vehicle for 24 hours, and it's in service for 24 hours, but currently that's staffed with overtime for 12-hour shifts.
So this is a revenue neutral thing then, right? If it's to cover overtime.
Right. I mean, I think you would certainly say that this would help to offset overtime costs by the increase in the personnel should lower the overtime costs associated with that particular rescue unit.
Just as a reference point, just it seems like a lot, but there's a kind of staffing analysis that's conducted. So for every seat in an apparatus, it requires roughly 4.6 or 4.7 people to staff those vehicles appropriately. So if we were to add 5 positions, that basically adds one seat in an apparatus for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Okay. Thank you. I want to touch on the public safety drone. That's going to be operated out of the Fusion Center. And will that drone program be able to, I brought it up the last time, will that drone be able to patrol the coast to keep boats outside of the exclusion zone as part of the Marine Patrol?
So the drones will be, one of the drones or station will be at the police headquarters, and then the other location is yet to be determined. And they're tied in with the computer-aided dispatch system, so when there's a call for service that comes in, then the drones are dispatched to that location. As far as patrolling the waterways, for that, they're not really meant for that purpose, but we do have the drone program that we can utilize for that, separate from the drone as first responders.
Okay. I think that would be important to have a drone for the Marine Patrol to patrol the coast to keep the boats outside the exclusion zone.
Yes, sir. I think you made that comment when we were discussing this last time, and it was taken by us, and we were looking at that.
Right.
For sure.
Is there, when you, I know I'm going to go really high level on this one. It's probably very, very expensive. I'm just curious, and maybe, you know what? I'll talk about that in one of our meetings.
Good job.
Better. No. So we always talk about alternative revenue streams, but yet when staff comes up with an alternative revenue stream, some of us just vote against it. That being said, I've talked about our parking fees on the beach should go towards paying for some of the maintenance on the beach as an alternative revenue stream, because if we don't have people going to the beach, you're not going to fill the garages and collect revenue. And if you're going to fill the garages and collect revenue, they're creating more maintenance issues on the beach. So they should be tied together, and the parking fund should pay for part of the public works budget to keep the beaches clean, to encourage people to use the garages, to pay for fees. And you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like a circle-ish kind of thing.
I will say that
And washes the other type of thing.
Sure. I will say when it comes to parking, one thing that's important to point out is that as we go into the next fiscal year, we also have the Harrison Street garage that needs to be constructed. Certainly there'll be revenue generated from that as well, but that's something that we have to be mindful of, as well as, we have other debt payments that we have to make as part of that. So we have to just we certainly understand, and trust me, we are looking for additional revenue streams, and we will do what we can to ensure that we can move whatever dollars we can from a cost allocation standpoint in particular, from the parking fund into the general fund. But ultimately, we do have expenses in the parking fund that we do need to be mindful of before we go ahead and potentially
Roll it in.
Yeah, roll it into the general fund, or take a significant dollars out of the parking fund when we have those expenses, as well as any of the other maintenance and improvements that we have at all the garages as well. And
I'm going to leave it at this, my final words, with I appreciate, and the residents of and membership of the Boulevard Heights Neighborhood Association that always are talking about it. We appreciate it being in a budget to fund the West Hollywood Concert Series. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Biederman. Let's get to Commissioner Quintana.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just, for slide 24, could you talk a little bit about what community shuttle coordination means exactly? And I just wanted to make sure that the Sun Shuttle West and Circuit west of 95 are still budgeted.
So the community shuttle coordination, I believe, is really meant to cover obviously the Sun Shuttle with regards to the city's portion of that, as well as any grant matches that we have with regards to improving the community shuttle program. I don't know if Andrea, if you have any.
Just because I saw mention of the CRA Sun Shuttle, but I didn't see anything about Sun Shuttle West mentioned, and I just want to make sure that's not forgotten.
Adam, I suspect this language, community shuttle coordination, might mean that, it's pretty laborious to manage the community shuttle and deal with its hand-holding, and that this is a desire to fund a position that would coordinate these things. Andrea, am I reading these words correctly or no?
For community shuttle, it's really just coordination of our multimodal transportation within the city. Someone
Saying
did
it's
mention.
time-consuming and you need people?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
We've talked about that. We just recently got a grant, and so we're looking to expand some of the transportation routes within microtransit. So all of this transportation, in order to really launch it out there, just requires a lot of coordination amongst us to be able to achieve that.
So, but what does it mean in the context of this presentation?
Do you have to hire someone? What does the impact does it have on the budget?
That's what I'm looking.
There was additional advertising that was looking at signage and outreach to the community related to the community shuttle. And we are committing to funding that in the upcoming budget year. I will tell you that the county has, and Broward County Transit previously did not really recognize microtransit as a service that they would be providing within the Broward County Transit. That has changed with their Transit 2040 program, and they are now actively looking at how microtransit fits into the overall transit picture. Previously, that was pretty much put onto the cities to look at microtransit, and I think they have seen the popularity of it, the demand for it, and are looking at ways to better coordinate those microtransit services across the county. So we will also be looking to leverage in any way that we can the county's commitment to microtransit to potentially be able to maintain and expand in the future those options.
Were you going to say something else, Andrea?
No, she
covered it.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think that's a really good thing to focus on. And then, maybe that I just didn't catch the name, and maybe Commissioner Biederman already said, what does city detect mean on slide 25?
So that includes placing, it's an AI function of.
That's 23. Go to 25.
Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. I apologize. This is an AI function to put cameras and other detecting equipment, I'm sure Javon can speak to a little better than I can, on our vehicles so that they can detect potholes, code violations, et cetera.
Oh, so Commissioner, that's correct. So City Detect is a software that staff procured. It has been procured already, currently installed on the vehicles as of June 2nd. It's currently going through configuration. So what it does is when code officers drive around, the system will detect violations or noted violations that we program into the system. So it's a way for us to be a little bit more proactive and efficient in some of the things that we're seeing out there in the field.
That's great. So I won't have to do as much driving around being a code officer. That's awesome. I like that idea. So I really appreciate all the efforts at efficiency using technology. I know we need to. I know we need to reduce costs. I know we need to prepare for what may be the passing of the constitutional amendment. I just would like for us to also consider that the human touch is still really important, that so many of our residents don't know what services they get from their city, that don't necessarily see the impact on their day-to-day life. And I think that engaging residents has to be a principal priority for us. And I'm concerned that if we strictly look at technological solutions to our challenges, that we may be undervaluing the low-tech, high-touch human part of getting through difficult times and having our residents feel ownership and have direct evidence of what they get from being in this city. So a lot of what I wanted to speak about today was first to appreciate the efforts that have been made to bring programming to the parks that are in District 6, where there really was very little programming when I first came here as a commissioner. And I know that there's been efforts to expand the hours that community centers are open. I would not want that to be compromised, because I do think that it's a way for people to have a personal experience with what their city has to offer. The programming at our community centers, their family activities at parks may appear to be low priority, but I really think that they're very high priority and should not be undervalued. I also think that as much as we can engage residents, our activities really connect with what I heard as a principal when you said what were the two issues that you heard most from people in your area. The one that I brought up was the high cost of living here. And I think I hear that more than anything. So as we're looking at increased water bills, I have really been thinking about how do we help people control their water consumption, and how do we educate people and provide everything we can to help them reduce their bills through their own decisions about when to consume. So I would like for us to consider things like teaching people how to safely collect rainwater so that they can use that in irrigation. In fact, we purchase irrigation water from other cities ourselves, so our city could actually be also harvesting rainwater so that we would save money in doing that and be a model for our residents, but also to teach residents on their home site what they can do. What they can do at their home to reduce flooding by the use of things like rain gardens. These would require that someone on staff lead that effort, but I do think that it would be worthwhile. I also have been, and I'm looking forward to Joseph Kroll's presentation on trees, sidewalks, and streets, because I'm trying to think of innovative ways that we can take care of trees in our public right-of-way in a way that doesn't require a lot of additional expense to the city's budget. And I think the only way to do that is to engage residents in being part of that solution. So again, I don't see how technology could help us with maintenance of our trees in public right-of-way. I think we need to engage the people in being a part of that solution. And again, I think that's how they're going to see the value of what they're getting from us, is if otherwise they have to do it themselves. If our residents have to do it themselves or pay for it as individually for someone to come and do the kinds of things that their city does for them, I think that's when they'll realize the value that they get from getting it from their city. So I guess I'll stop at that. I just would want us to balance the technological solutions with making sure that we engage residents as a priority.
So if I can just touch for a minute, I appreciate that. I just want to touch for a minute a little bit on the budget side of things. So yes, from a technology standpoint, I really do want to take a little time. Then I want to obviously highlight the budget office has been working instrumentally and along with IT on this effort with regards to our budget transparency module. We certainly hear and understand, especially coming with regards to property tax reform, the understanding of where do property tax dollars go? What value are you getting for your property tax bill every year? And that's something that we're going to be utilizing this this budget transparency module through OpenGov to do, is to really showcase for them, okay, what your property tax bill is here for the city, and try to apportion out how much of it goes to police, how much goes to fire, how much goes to parks, et cetera, so they understand, really where let's just say $1,000, how that gets apportioned out every year. I think that'll hopefully be an important tool. Certainly as part of not only through education of our budget and how our budget works, but also through property tax reform. One thing that I'll be launching this year is like a little bit of a budget roadshow, trying to go to different parts of the city to provide input, to provide an understanding of where the budget is. I think it's also important, speaking of, I mentioned the word input because what I failed to mention as part of the budget transparency module is that module is going to give residents the opportunity to, if they were given a budget of $1,000, how, or whatever the amount is, how would they apportion those dollars out to those services? So I think that's an important tool as well for residents to understand where exactly their dollars go and how their dollars go very quickly. In terms of all the services that the city provides. So I certainly agree with you. A lot of education is needed with our residents, and that's something that we plan on doing specifically and especially out of property tax reform conversations. But I think it's an important conversation to have with our residents so they understand that we'll have the technology tool as well, but it also, to your point, will have the human touch element to augment that.
Adam, Commissioner Quintana brings up a good point. Considering that the Parks and Rec division or department is the second largest expense of the city after the public safety departments, it might be helpful to have a little bit more of a deep dive presentation on Parks and Rec and how and where those dollars get spent, so that we might be able to give you input. I believe, and I agree with Commissioner Quintana, that the programming opportunity goes a very long way. Just when you consider that the expense of hiring, let's just call it a coach to do a program, and you have 30 people, 50 people participating, when you're there and in it, you realize, wow, these dollars went a really long way to facilitating community, to providing, this recreational activity that goes to a lot of helping people and contributing to the enjoyment of their life here in the city. That dollar for dollar, that dollar is going a very long way considering what the program is costing for the coach. And considering that we have people that are in and manage and sit within these community centers, what are they doing to handle programming directly? I think it's a real good question as to what are we doing with Parks and Rec and how are we managing that enterprise in general, to see if it's, if we can add any suggestion on the most efficient way to, spend that $10 or more million a year. I know it's probably like 13, 14, 15, 16, I think.
Yep.
So I think that's a great exercise. Maybe that requires a workshop one day, or maybe a presentation in writing, and maybe a one-on-one with the Parks Director and Javon with us as a commission, so we can talk about and learn more about how those dollars, which are, again, the second largest after public safety,
yep, absolutely,
to the city. All right, Commissioner Hernandez or Gruber, did you want to speak? No? No comments? No? So I'll add some comments then. So one I think global thing that I see here with your impact presentation and your approach, while these are great, words, innovation, momentum, process improvement, accountability, customer satisfaction, technology, if you look at the collective set of what you're proposing, and I've said this in years past, it's almost that almost everything is at least looking inward at the organization and saying, how can I invest in the organization to run better and to respond better to resident needs? Not much of it, at least in the initiatives that you're looking at, is out looking into what improvements are we making out there in the city. In years past, we've talked about corridor landscaping and things of that nature, and those new standards of service in those regards continue in this budget. I know they do. But as you think going forward, when you tie this outlook of where you want to invest extra dollars in the city, and then you look at, for example, the type of response that even in that early, what two concerns do you hear from residents most? Litter, parking, code enforcement, traffic speed, and parking for our public parks, which we've done a little bit for in Stan Goldman this year, of course. You realize there's a disconnect sometimes between what the organization knows that it needs for itself internally versus what we're hearing from residents they want to see as service. So I just want you to be mindful of that as you think of the impact that you want to create. Make sure that the impact is also relevant to and responsive to what residents are saying they would like to see most. A lot of it is very low dollar expense to the city. but we ought to really consider that to be a priority when we consider, looking at the budget and looking at service delivery. Customer satisfaction also means responding better to litter, which people, photograph and send and ought to be very easy for the city to handle. But it doesn't seem like the process improvement in litter response is reaching a point where it's, where it's so much better that we're getting less, that we see it less. So, we really, I think, ought to look at process improvement on how it's responsive to these resident concerns and try to tie that in maybe a little bit better. So I think as we look to property tax reform, and even without it, I think we ought to be mindful that the investments that the city makes, you also want to look at what is the financial return to the city. So obviously with economic development, by investing in economic development and attracting investment, we're actually creating new tax base that bolsters the largest revenue source for the city. That's important to always, I think, now in this new environment, if we do get into it, and even without it, looking at, where can I invest in infrastructure or any city service that ends up, again, yielding a return. And you could argue that everything that we do as a city to make the city run better and provide service should result in a more desirable city. It's well-functioning and people will want to live here, be here, invest here. But there are things that are external that really prime the pump that I think are now that much more important when you consider that new property tax creation by new taxable value, by new investment is really that much more critical for the city. We've had great property value growth the past 10 years. We've more than doubled our taxable value. It's now definitely stabilized. I think housing values have, I don't want to say peaked, but they've reached a very high level. So we're going to see less growth, just naturally speaking, because of where we've reached relative to wages, relative to affordability, and all that. We're already seeing the pressures of the response to that because we've gotten to that point of such high value that the state found it important to increase the homestead exemption by that significant amount. I think this also should make us realize that we have perhaps even a deficit in years ahead. Obviously, with the property tax or homestead exemption increase, that would result obviously in a deficit. But then when you consider the 5% cap on the growth of commercial, and you consider the increase by CPI, as you mentioned, the homestead exemption, if you're not growing by, and the fact that we're sort of at a peak of value, then you're really looking at a flat situation, absent new investment in the city, new taxable value. You're looking at a pretty flat condition for the years ahead. So obviously, city management needs to be cognizant of that. Makes me question whether or not one of your strategies is going to be looking at the pay-go schedule for equipment replacement that you've set out. Maybe you, like any household, you stretch out the ownership of that car or what have you a couple more years than maybe would otherwise be ideal. Obviously, using sense into the resale value and the useful life of the asset. I think you'll be doing more of that. Core services like public works and maintenance of the city, I think, is definitely a priority. Again, because the outdoor visible condition of the city affects, in large part, its desirability, which affects investment, which affects attitude, which affects all of it. And so we need to make sure we keep the city as clean and as desirable as can be because of what that creates, in increasing investment and continue to attract investment that's ever more important in a high homestead exemption environment. Even though it's not part of the operating budget, the unique interlocal agreement that we have with Broward County that does have dollars in it, we've talked over the past couple years about staff's impression, because we've charged you with the challenge of looking at maybe how we would tweak the categories of opportunity in the interlocal agreement with Broward County to do more within the low to moderate income neighborhoods. How can that help us, again, increase desirability, increase safety, increase everything, and support new housing as well? So I'd love to see that, need to see that come back, hopefully during the fall and before the end of the year, because we want to be able to deploy those dollars as quick as possible and have the City Commission consider what those new categories at the recommendation of staff. I yield a lot to Ryan and his great crew there to say, hey, where are the needs, and could we deploy these dollars more quickly if we had additional categorical or threshold changes in the agreement? I believe the county would be pretty open-minded if we presented something. We talked a little bit about AI, and so software expenses, like you're talking about an asset management system. I mean, from what I'm gathering, these new large language models can do things, especially replacing software as a service in a lot of ways. And it makes me wonder if you can prompt AI to create an asset management system that would be basically wholly ours, created by AI, and not have to pay whatever this software company that wants to sell us an asset management system is going to be selling us at a monthly and a huge, maybe upfront cost. And you might want to look at all of our software expenses as to, can this be replaced by AI that we create, by agents that we create? And so I think Raheem and whoever is going to be our resident expert with AI need to look at all of our software and say, can this be replaced with something in-house? That's one of the benefits of AI that is going to be, a great thing for organizations, is creating our own in-house tools without having to pay a company monthly. Like Trimble, I heard you mention the name. They won't want to hear that, but it's the reality. They're being displaced by what AI can create, right? The strategic plan update, I get it. Obviously, when you have, you want to do it from time to time, and especially when you have 3 new commissioners here on the dais. At the same time, the $100,000 expense, attached to it makes me wonder, why does that need to be a $100,000 expense? I don't need to pay a company to walk us through a process $100,000. That's my personal view. I think we're smart enough to do that in-house. So just consider that might not be necessary or at least less expensive. I agree with you that underutilized services have to be looked at first and as a cost-benefit analysis. If we're running empty shuttles or if we're running empty this or empty that, then that's something that ought to be looked at, again, regardless of property tax reform. Being able to call it for what it is and cutting if we need to. Love what CMed is doing. Today we had a good opportunity with inviting realtors in to learn about Hollywood, to attract buyers into Hollywood, to maintain the demand in the city, to bolster it, to preserve property value. All of that's really important. It's a good investment. The investment CMed is making into small business success and attraction is critical for all of that we're doing. And so I know that is a big priority and will continue to be for all of us. Commissioner Biederman mentioned the Parking Enterprise Fund. I know I've mentioned it for years internally on, does this need to be a set-aside enterprise fund? I personally believe that you could still roll it into the general fund and obviously treat it as a fund within your general fund, but also not restrict it as an untouchable fund, because in years past, when we didn't have a Harrison Street garage expense, there was significant budget balance in the parking fund just sitting there, when in fact maybe it could have gone to investments within the city. And as you look at the horizon of maybe not, in the future of not building too many new garages, in the outlook ahead, that you might want to realize that after we do the Harrison garage, that fund balance is going to start growing very fast. Depending on how we finance that garage, we can finance it in a way where we borrow more at low rates versus spending cash out of pocket, and maybe create a cash flow for ourselves. So look at that, and then we'll have to look at our government partners at the county and state and federal level, and push for more appropriation, for more contribution toward areas of their responsibility that we might operate, but they maybe need to be informed, and we need to approach them with different strategies on how local government can deploy public dollars that they're collecting in a way that's sensible and contributes to the state and the country's and the county's success. Us being a part of all of that, within the 12th largest city in the state of Florida. So looking forward to the continuing process here for the budget. I have complete confidence in the team, but again, look at the balance of what are we doing out in the city to keep it desirable, to keep attracting satisfaction and investment, all the way from the business side to the residential side to the neighborhood level, as you look at this and build this, and at the same time with now, of course, the discussion ever more greatly on efficiency and calling the shots for what's worthwhile and seems to have public participation and support and what doesn't. And at the same time, what could be softwares and different things that we've spent money on and continually do so, but maybe the employees are not engaging too much with, and if there's not participation on the employee side, then maybe consider going in a different direction or cutting things. So, Commissioner Hernandez, go ahead.
Thank you. I really wasn't going to say anything, but there's a couple of things that have been mentioned that may be worth noting. The parking, when it comes to parking, one of the things that we've been able to use with the funds from the parking is acquire the Knights of Columbus, and the reason that we did that was because it has a substantial parking lot that we could probably recoup some of the money, so therefore the investment is warranted, and that's being done with the parking funds to do that. If you look around the city of Hollywood, there's a great deal of need regarding parking when it comes to the parks that we currently have. And that fund can be used to utilize the land around it in order for the parents to be able to park, as long as we charge a nominal fee for that. So it's recurring income that will come to the city of Hollywood. So I think that rather than to move that money for maintenance on the beach, I think we ought to stock the parks with proper parking for them to be able to do that before we're thinking of doing anything else with that fund. That's just my personal opinion, and that's only because I see parents parking on the grass and everything else, parking on the neighbor's lawn. If you go out west, you can see when there's a soccer match that there's not enough parking, even though that's one of the few parks that actually has parking, because it's still parking on the swells and what have you. So whatever we can do to alleviate that, it's a great investment, and it's also land that we would actually own, and therefore it would help. So that's just, I know you guys have talked about that, so I just wanted to address that. Also, when it comes to the special events, I look at it here, and I wasn't going to say anything but I look at the culture diversity that we have in the city of Hollywood, and I look where we're spending our money. We're not balancing it. I think we need to take a closer look at that. And we need to take, diversity is something that is very important to the city of Hollywood, and is very important to the growing Hispanic population, as well as the American African population that exists in the city of Hollywood. It's not represented in the budget and how we're spending our money. So I'd like to be able to look at that a little better, because if you look at it, and I'm not picking on anybody in particular, the African American, they only get $15,000 on one side. The veterans barbecue gets $15,000, yet we spending a great deal of more money in other areas that doesn't balance when it comes to this. I'm not complaining about the Salsa Fest, and I'm not complaining about the other, but let's look at all of it. We're spending $280,000 with one company. The Jazz Festival, I didn't put $200,000, I just figured $150,000, which is what we voted on. But here on this budget for the next coming year, it's budgeted at $200,000. So that's $200,000 plus $150,000 for the Rhythm Foundation. That's $350,000. You look at the advertising dollars that we're allocating for that, it's another $30,000. That's $280,000. And I did some crunching the numbers here. Just about all the other events put together come up to $300,000, except for the major events, like the Candy Cane Parade. I didn't include that there. I did include the car show. I did include the cardboard boxes, the Martin Luther King celebrations, the Hispanic Heritage Concert. So if you add all of the other ones, it's up to $300,000, and yet in one company, we're spending $280,000. So I think that we need to balance that a little better, because as we move forward, if we do have the tax adjustment that may be coming our way, we want to be able to continue to provide a balance special events with the diversity that we have here. I'm not saying to take everything away. I'm just saying we need to balance it. And maybe the Rhythm Foundation can help put some of lower the cost for some of the other people based on the programs that they can provide. At the end of the day, we all need to work together. We all need to work when it comes to that. But I look at the budget for this, it doesn't look like it's balanced when it comes to the diversity that we currently have in the city of Hollywood. As far as everything else, I waited to the last minute because everybody else covered just about everything that we had to cover. So I think that we have the ability to do what we need to do. We just need to be smart about it. I think the comment that you made, Mayor, regarding utilizing IA in areas that we currently have either a consulting firm or somebody else that is charging us tens of thousands of dollars, that's going to be a game changer. Yet we need to be able to have somebody that can actually vet those IA to make sure that we're using the proper one and not, stabbing ourselves in the toe, if you would. So there is ability to be able to cut some of this going forward, and I think we owe it to our residents to do so.
Thank you. Commissioner Gruber, anything to add?
I think you guys covered all of it. I think maybe with, if we want to get into the events with Parks and Rec that you just brought up, that you brought up that workshop, I think that would be something to harp on and really dissect it, see what each event really brings. I mean, I noticed also our MLK event, I think it had $7,500. So going to what you said, so I'd be up for, kind of analyzing it and seeing if it's fair equity as to where everything is going. But everybody covered everything else, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Biederman.
Just a couple of things, as some people say, food for thought. How does the, just for the public's information, that think that, if they vote to reduce property taxes, it just is going to reduce our budget? Can you touch on how that's not going to be true with our millage rate payments?
So something also important to point out with regards to, as I mentioned earlier, with our millage and how we were able to reduce our debt service millage. So again, think of our debt service as a mortgage payment, right? That mortgage payment stays flat over the course of that debt repayment. And so we've been able to reduce our millage, our debt service millage, incrementally, albeit, but incrementally every year with the value of additional our tax revenue, or sorry, our taxable value growth. And so if we were to shave roughly, in the case of the $250,000 homestead exemption, over $3 billion off of our tax revenue, or sorry, our taxable value, what that would mean is that we would now have to raise the millage rate in order to get the same amount that we need to make our debt service payments. So that doesn't include potential, and again, just throwing out the potential that we may have to look at in a regular operating millage increase in order to help recoup some additional dollars from the operating revenue side. This would just be specifically to debt service only, but that's something important to point out as well, is that as taxable value goes down, that would mean our debt service millage would have to go up because we have to ensure that we're making our debt service payments.
Voter-approved debt service payments.
Correct.
Okay.
Voter-approved debt service payments.
So the other thing that I have is, I'm going to touch on the parks and the additional parking. While I agree that we need additional parking, that could come out of park impact fees, because if you're not charging for parking with meters, you really shouldn't be using parking fees to do it. But that's a discussion for another day. I just want to touch on that. And the final thing I'm going to say is, if this thing goes through on May 4th, are some of these expenses that we're adding in mid-year reductions before we hire? Like, if we don't hire the 6 firefighters, I know that we talked about how it's revenue neutral. I'm just going to use that as an example. We could postpone that.
You're right, Bob.
There's other things we could postpone if, not the one-time expenses.
You mean November 3rd?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So after November 3rd, if this goes through, can we prepare mid-year next year? And I won't be here, but could we prepare mid-year by not getting into those additional expenses that are reoccurring? And I'm only using firefighters as an example, not as the one, because I know that we need to do it. But there's other expenses that we're adding in here that are going to be reoccurring year after year that we might want to cut back before we get committed to it?
Sure. So to answer that question, yes. The short answer to your question is yes. When we adopt this budget in September, we obviously will not know where we are on November 3rd. But it is early enough in our fiscal year, only about a month and 2 days or 3 days in, that we could potentially look at not fulfilling certain services or certain positions as part of that. Certainly, we will have to take a very hard look at where we are for the fiscal year 2027 budget. Again, even though it won't have a fiscal impact on the fiscal year 2027 budget, it's certainly something that is being top of mind as we go into this budget development process, and it certainly will be top of mind certainly after on November 4th, if in fact this does get approved. So that all things will be on the table with regards to what we look like as a city, as a state, as a county. After November 3rd, it's going to really change the way we're able to provide services and the services that we're able to offer. That's certainly everything that we're going to have to take a look at.
The one-time investments are great. We could go through with that, but anything that we're adding in that's going to be a reoccurring annual expense, I think we should reevaluate after November 3rd.
Correct. And of course, like I said, in terms of the one-time investments, we will be having that as part of our capital workshop in August. One thing I just wanted to point out, if I could, Mayor, certainly, and you mentioned earlier in your comments regarding landscaping, we are. It wasn't referenced maybe in the impact slides only because they're not additional, but we are, as Duncan mentioned, we are continuously in funding and increasing our funding, especially with regards to
record
CPI.
expense. Yeah.
Yes, our landscaping efforts, because we heard you all loud and clear a couple of years ago with regards to that. I think we've made monumentous improvement with regards to our landscaping, both in our right-of-ways and our medians as well. So that's been factored in. With regards to the comments about the ILA, yes, we are working on that. Ryan and I are working on coming up with that list. I will tell you something also important to point out is that we received in December the final amount with regards to the higher amount that we get from the ILA from the county. It's the beach CRA sunsets in June. Starting in December, per the ILA for the next 10 years, that amount will now be $1.75 million for a total of $17.5 million over 10 years. So that'll be a significant decrease. So that certainly begs the issue even more that we should take a very hard look at our housing services.
And the balance that we have currently in the fund.
Absolutely.
Yes. Final parting comments?
Yes.
I'm assuming that on page 8, you're going to recommend on July 7th, which Commissioner Vice Mayor pointed out is wrong on the cover. It's not maximum July 8th, it's July 7th, I think, is our meeting?
Our commission meeting is July 8th.
No, July 7th.
July 7th.
July 7th. I'm sorry. That's on me. July 7th.
Is going to be flat on our operating millage? Is going to be your recommendation, I'm assuming?
Staff's recommendation is to keep our operating millage flat. And again, that is, obviously at the will of the commission to make adjustments to that. But certainly, as we prepare ourselves for the potential of property tax reform, that would be staff's recommendation at this point.
So just my final comment, can we, if we were to not reduce the bond millage and we were to keep that flat, could we prepay part of that to offset next year's increase that we might have to do?
We would have to, I feel like we've looked at this in the past, but we can look at it again about any prepayment penalties associated with those bond payments, with those debt service payments. So we can certainly take a look at that and see if that's something that's practical. Sure, we can take a look at that. That's not a problem.
Yeah, but let's remember that, and you'd have to take a look at what the debt service is and what these, millage rates multiplied by the taxable value generate to pay the debt off and the 3 series there. But keep in mind that we'd be at a, $3.8 billion loss on property tax reform in fiscal year 29. And so...
It's minuscule.
So considering where we were and where the impact of the property tax reform would take us in terms of, say, equaling roughly 2023 values. It's my hope that even if it were rolled back to that degree, that we wouldn't have to, adjust any of this up, that we'd have ample tax base to, sustain these repayments and not have to adjust those. Just as I mentioned, I haven't delved into the numbers too deeply, but I know you'll take a look at that. All right. All right, everyone. Well, I appreciate the time today and this opening operating budget workshop. Obviously, the city is looking to provide the best service it can for all the residents, and it does so at record levels. We know there's room to go, and so I want to thank all the staff directors and all the staff members that are here. Appreciate your work. The best your departments operate results in the best for the city of Hollywood and results in the best for this organization. So thank you all so much. See you again soon.